My earliest memory of steam was lying in my pram at about the age of 2, but alongside a railway line, while my father was in the public house adjacent. And a train came by, a steam train, which the railway always steam in those days, and a spark from the engine landed in my pram, which set me on fire. And my father came rushing out and suddenly realised that his young son was on fire in my pram and promptly poured a pint of beer all over me to put me out. So my earliest memory of steam is coupled with my earliest memory of public houses, and I've enjoyed both all my life.
Poetry in motion, gigantic moving masses.
Look, you can dispense with the Elizabethans. You can dispense with King Arthur. When you talk about our industrial history and the Industrial Revolution that Britain pioneered and gave to the world, you are dealing with the greatest legend of all time.
Steam trains is everybody's way of life up here. Live and breathe steam trains.
No two steam locomotives were ever the same. Each one behaved differently. They're almost individuals. If I was going to be daft enough as want to buy one of these things, then this was the one that had to be bought.
He was certainly daft enough, and he could afford to buy it. And more importantly, he understood something of this locomotive's true worth. John Cameron is no amiable, wealthy eccentric. He's a practical farmer who's also head of ScotRail and spends one day a week on the main British rail board in London. But he dreams young, like most steam buffs.
You get to know the people in the stations, and you get to know the people that ride behind the steam specials. It's not just the driver that gets the best out of an engine, it's the driver and his fireman. So in a sense, to every train there was 3 up front. There was the driver, the fireman and the engine. And to get the absolute best out of them, the driver had to know his engine and the fireman had to know his engine. And then the driver had to know the fireman and the fireman had to know the driver. And only when you got an optimum of all these 3 pulling together, then you really get some super runs and get maximum performance out of the engine.
There's a pleasing sense of equality among steam enthusiasts. Maybe the mateship blurs the class distinctions. If you can't afford your own locomotive, there's plenty more modest artifacts to thrill to.
Now, this hat belonged to a Methodist minister who unfortunately went blind, or nearly blind. He was a booking clerk on this railway. And I've inherited his hat. I inherit most things. Do you like our gas lamps? And we have one gas fitter who is so dedicated, he comes all the way from Blackpool every weekend just to do gas lamps. That's real dedication. We exist for family parties. They're our mainstay. They're the people we like. We like the kids to see what we've grown up with.
It was a terrifying thing for a small child when the 2 locos lifted their safety valves and the steam rose to the heavens.
Into the firebox which is here.
And sometimes the fear and power and excitement of steam can even overcome the enthusiasm of the teacher.
And these metal tubes, they heat up the water in the boiler.
Steam locomotives are something in the lines of being elemental, in the sense that they use water and they also have fire in them, all elemental things which give them a tremendous sense of power and a wonderful spectacle. But my early journeys by steam were to the Highlands, And I'm not a city person, so for me, the steam locomotive was a means of escape.
We were never bored. We always had some interest. And there were an awful lot of people interested in railways. They didn't take numbers. This was before the days of Ian Allen's railway pocketbooks. Nobody took loco numbers. They used to watch and study, if you like, trains and train working in general.
How could a steam buff ever be bored, when even the cat in his garden is a second-generation station master's cat, and the wife of long standing knows and approves of the weakness?
Hello, Mum. Got the kettle on?
You put it on. Why? I'm not putting it on. I want to get on with this.
Scratch any steam buff, and right off he'll start talking about his childhood.
I was always fascinated by trains, and it wasn't long before I found that there was a way of imitating them. Not only imitating the sound, but what was much more important, imitating the action of the trains. And I used to imagine that the whole of the street was a railway train, and people were getting out of it. And I used to go down the street, opening all the garden gates so that the people could get out, and then I'd go down them back again and close them and wave my arms to the hidden driver somewhere at the front and set the train off. There was a lot of problems with people on the street, of course, who used to see me doing this, and they didn't understand what I was trying to do, I don't think. And as a result, they very often closed the gates before I could get to them. That was very unfortunate. I remember one little girl, Betty. She could never understand the principle of signalling. And I remember distinctly getting hold of her and putting her arm in a position and then showing her what to do. And then when she did it wrong, I, even in those days, lost my temper a little bit, and with the inevitable result that she burst into tears. So my adventures with girls at that age were basically with steam trains and so on, and if they did anything wrong, they cried.
I'm a schoolmaster in an independent boarding school, and this is really an alternative career. This is, in a sense, a second career for me. It's like running another small business, because it's not just a matter of putting on the uniform like this and coming out and doing a duty. There's a great deal of committee work behind it. There's a lot of decision-making, a lot of debate before you even get to decision-making. There's the whole question of finance, there's marketing and presentation, organization, catering, retailing, as well as actually bringing the whole thing together on a particular day like this and letting the public see it happen.
After you've looked and touched and photographed and recorded the engine number, the next logical step is an authentic scheduled steam train journey. This one's in Wales, but the whole country is dotted with them.
Next departure, 10:45 Mountain Print service to Minffordd. the route of the railway is quite a feat of engineering. It goes in some rather awkward places, quite often on narrow ledges quite high up the mountainside.
At £16 each, only the ticket prices are bang up to date. But then there's no extra charge for the social history.
It was built originally to bring the slate down from the slate mines in Blaenau Ffestiniog, and it was operated in the early years by gravity. The empty wagons were hauled back up the line again by horses. The horses used to ride down in the loaded trains on special dandy wagons at the back of the train. There was supposedly a brakeman sort of every 10 wagons or so to keep the train under control on the way down.
Brian Bushell gave up a job in computers to help run this railway. But the ticket price the tourist pays doesn't always cover the expenses. For most private railways, the true costs are subsidized by an army of volunteer helpers who devote their free time and energies to keeping the train on the line.
Well, my husband is a driver on the Worth Valley Railway, so he does one day at the railway and I do the other. So the day he's at home, he looks after the children, does the housework, and the day I'm at home, I do the same. And it works out very well. So we're both equally involved on different days. It took a long time to become a trainee fireman, about 17 years in all, from start to finish. Because it's such a male-dominated society. It takes men roughly between 2 and 5 years to become a trainee fireman and then a fireman, probably because of the fact that they're males. People don't associate ladies or women with dirty mechanical monsters like these, which a lot of people are. A lot of ladies do like to actually get into dirty jobs. Social life at the Worth Valley Railway is absolutely brilliant, something you've got to experience, really. People who stay over at the weekend sleep in the compartments at the end of the yard, and they come up on a Friday evening and we go to the pub, get absolutely rat-ass, back to the mess room, put the music on, dance on the tables, have a few bottles of wine, go to bed about 4 o'clock, get up, light the engines up with an hangover, go out, fire the engines, work in the yard, do the same thing Saturday night, absolutely wrecked again, party till about 4 o'clock and then back home, bed, lie in Sunday morning, come back and do the same thing over and over again. You've got to experience it really to understand what I'm talking about.
On the little private rail lines of Britain, Denise is in no way an untypical railway volunteer. Eileen has been on the same track for years.
I come here and forget all the jobs at home, the washing, the ironing and the cooking, and I just come down and switch off completely and find it very relaxing. When I first came here, I felt like I'd landed off the moon, because everyone sort of stared at me and there wasn't another female in sight. But I was very quickly accepted and soon realised that there were quite a few women about the railway doing various jobs, but there were also 6 other fire women alongside me. When I first came, I started my training on Joan, and I really liked Joan. And then when Joan went in to have some work done on her, I had to fire Countess and got in quite a mess, because it has a full-size injector and the water comes in very fast and then you lose pressure, and if you haven't got enough coal you find yourself in trouble. And I really didn't like Countess at all because I just couldn't cope with her. But I love Countess now better than Jo now. I'm used to her. The children have got used to me coming down here. At first I think they thought I was a bit crazy. My daughter, in her words, thought I was nuts. But in their own little way, I think they're quite proud of the fact that their mum's a fire person.
£80 there on the right. Is there 85 anywhere? 85 at the front, thank you. 85. 90? 90, thank you very much. 90. 100, thank you, on the far right, £100. £100. Selling at £100. At £100, sold Jones.
It seems that everything that was ever bolted onto a steam train or screwed to a railway station has a cash value.
120, sir, at the back, 120. Middle of the room, 130. Yeah. Come on, 110. Surely it's worth 110. At the left, 110. Left front, £110. Would you pass me the Granite City? In the centre, 110. Is there any further bidding on this lot? If not, then I'm selling at £110. At 110, sold John. Lot 31 then. The nice Great Western cabside number plate. Nice brass cabside there. Start that at £1,200, I think. Must be worth 1,200. Is the 1,200 anywhere? 1,200.
If a nice brass cabside number plate starts bidding at £1,200, you've got to wonder what a whole engine costs. If you collect true eccentrics, then England is a happy hunting ground. The trouble is, they look so normal, it's hard to pick them out. Insurance clerks, retired policemen, railwaymen, vicars, and bank managers like Laurie Marshall. Straights.
Must have them straight. This little collection of 25 plates represents the majority of the private steam locomotive builders in Britain from 1880 onwards. For the set to be complete, I should have 26, the missing one being the successors to the Falcon Locomotive Company, namely the Brush Electric Company. I had a customer at Lloyds Bank Crawley who was Indian, who had a bridging loan which went on and on and on, became known as the fourth bridging loan. And when it was finally repaid, he said, would you like to come to India with me as my guest? So, of course, I said yes. Came home, spoke to the wife, Maureen, and said, what would you say if I tell you I got the chance to go to India? She said, well, if you got the money, you'd better go, hadn't you? So I went. And since then, I've been another 20 times. These are the Indian YP class meter gauge express passenger engines. It's on a local train out in the desert area, near Hubli. But when I was manager of Lloyds Bank in Strood, I had a customer who became naval attaché in Moscow. So we had he and his wife round to dinner before they went off on their commission. And he said, I suppose you want me to get you a Russian builder's plate? I said, yes, if you possibly can. And luckily, a little later on, he met the Russian railway minister and brought up this subject. And lo and behold, when he came back off his 2-year spell of duty, he brought not one plate, but 2 wrapped in a copy of Pravda in the diplomatic bag and marked not to be opened before UK.
Laurie Marshall's collection spills out of the main house and into the garage, probably much to the relief of the wife Maureen.
This set of plates is off a Spanish National Railway standard gauge locomotive, and it's a complete set of plates off one engine, from the buffer beam round to the cab, and the big builder's plate in the middle, which you'll notice is Great Southern Spain Railway. The loco is owned by an English company, as was the railway, and these are very much sought after. One of the difficulties of maintaining these plates is to stop the verdigris from building up between the letters. You may be interested to know that it takes approximately 7 hours to clean the whole collection. There's very few men in this country who are not turned on to looking at a steam engine when they see it, no matter whether they're really interested or not. Quite irresistible. The problem now is that there's too many of us chasing too few of them.
They've been chasing steam trains here for longer than most. This is Talach Lynn, the world's first preserved steam railway line. For 40 years, it's been in the care of enthusiasts. But that's not even half the story. Driver Maurice Wilson will tell you this line has run non-stop for 125 years. It wasn't even nationalised with the rest in 1948. The local wags say the London civil servants thought it had already been closed.
I suppose, to a large extent, I was fortunate in having been bred and born alongside a main line from London to Cambridge and King's Lynn, alongside what was the London and Nearly Everywhere Railway, the LNER, which absorbed the greatest ever railway, the Great Eastern Railway.
For men like Morris, the night mail will never stop crossing the border, is still shaking jugs in farmhouse bedrooms. It's a traditional dream world where time, when it doesn't stand still, drips slow. The engine shovels steam over its shoulder, running down the line into a past that, for the Buffs, is preferable to the present. But don't let the Thomas the Tank Engine locos fool you. This is no child's toy set up in a theme park for tourists. This locomotive is part of the original rolling stock that's been running here since the 1860s. At the end of a long day, the hard-working and beautifully maintained little engines are, as in all the best storybooks, put to bed in their little engine sheds. Works of art, perfect as a painting. Railway artists are traditionally steam buffs first and painters second. David Weston is no exception. Like most, he was not formally trained at art schools and was driven to painting through his obsession with steam.
The fourth bridge painting came about several years ago. I wanted the sort of engine to be quite diminutive at the scale of the bridge, at the side of the scale. So the bridge is all important in the picture, and then the light, which focuses on the little cottages and houses in the foreground. The light was lovely. Light is really the most important factor, I think, in all my paintings. If I can get the light right, I feel very much more happy with the result. If other people look at my pictures and get pleasure out of them, well, that's great, because that's what it's all about, and that's what you hope for. But I don't. I can't look at them and get pleasure out of them, because I get into the technicalities of where I've gone wrong. I start thinking, well, I could have painted that section a bit better, I should have lit that better, I should have done this, I should have done that. So you're never that happy with a painting as to say, well, that's a favourite one. Well, the painting that's on the easel at present is a shed interior. When the sun came streaming through and smoke was oozing up and steam mingling with it in the top, there was a tremendous sort of ethereal feel to the whole place. And at the foot of it, you've got these great towering monsters. I loved rainy days in rain-soaked engine yards when the engine cabs were glistening with rain, and perhaps sunshine after rain. Engines that were full of power and steam oozing out from every joint, to me, were much more interesting than dead engines in a yard where you could see every detail and every bit of valve gear and every rivet along the side. Turner obviously has an influence. I think you can probably see some Turner-esque bits in my painting, not that I'm for one moment suggesting that I in any way compare with Turner. There are several pictures which are railway territory and pure railway atmosphere. Those things to me have a poignancy. They're portraying the age that has gone, the railways that have disappeared. And there's another one, which is a sad old railway carriage. It's now just a mass of flaking paint and rotting away, but there's an old boy lives in it. And just through the window you can see the hint of the old washstand and the jug and bowl. And to me, again, it tells a story. It lived out its life as a railway carriage, and now it's become this home for this old boy on the East Coast It's his home. My railway loo started because I'd got an empty loo in the yard and didn't quite know what to do with it. The sound starts as soon as you put the light on, and you've got A4s coming out of Waverley Station and all sorts of trains screaming through them. The sound is part of the fun.
I think the steam engines they're a live thing. They've got personality and they sizzle and make noises, and electric engines are very dull. And I would think that diesel ones were too, although there's a big cult in diesel locomotives at the moment. But I don't think you can pick steam enthusiasts out of railway enthusiasts, really. And I suppose we're all a bit mad. And I suppose that's the thing that joins us all together. We're nuts.
We don't play trains here. We don't have people coming for a holiday or a weekend to drive an engine. We have people who work here all year round. And we find ourselves competing against lines which reduce artificially the cost of tickets because of the free labour content. I remember this as a kid, that to me the best present I could have was enough money to come across on the ferry and come to this railway. It was something magic. And the thought of this line disappearing for the next generations was too much, and perhaps like an idiot I went and bought it.
John Ellerton knew all the fun of being a pop star in the 70s and 80s, playing keyboard with the glam rock band Lynx. But he never lost his love of steam.
Steam engine is a living beast. It has a temperament of its own. It's an art driving it. This railway started off, in fact, as a horse tram. It was built by Mr. MacDougall of self-raising flour fame, and he wanted Fairbourne to become a model village for his employees. Very quickly it became a tourist attraction, and in 1890 was opened to the public. That's something a little bit different with the two locomotives back to back. Very old narrow gauge practice. It's rather nice to see it again. We are here to entertain the public. Yes, steam engines are wonderful. Yes, the histories of these railways is something to remember. But in the end, the way to keep these railways running is to bring visitors to them. In other words, we're a tourist attraction, we're showmen, just like people running a Ferris wheel. If one thinks show business is a little catty, probably the most catty business of the lot is the preservation movement. The preservation movement seems to be composed of a rather lot of blinkered people who have to restore a railway in a certain way. That means in a club with committees. If anybody wants to keep a railway running and do it slightly outside of their normal method of operation, one is castigated enormously. This railway has got a dreadful reputation for operating because we drive through sand dunes and we find ourselves in a very arduous environment. The experience we've had in operating railways has been condensed into the creation of this engine. It took me a year to design it, and it was 2 years in the works before it came out. It's a replica of a Sandy River and Rangeley Lake Railroad locomotive. That was a wonderful little 2-foot gauge railway which ran in Maine, in the United States. We're bringing back to life locomotives which haven't been seen since before the war, and obviously to build them full size would be virtually impossible in terms of cost, so at least you can see it half size here, and I think that's worth something.
The steam trains that run on the Great Cockrow Railway near London aren't even close to half size. But the buffs here will tell you they're not playing at railways. Their trains run on time and to schedule, just like the real thing.
The signalling system is most important because we're running 6, sometimes 8 trains at once, often on the same pieces of track. One of our number is a signal engineer and a professional railwayman, and he devoted his attention to putting in this very sophisticated signalling system.
I'm actually involved with the full size for the other 5 days of the week, and it's nice to come and play trains here for a change.
This is a pucker, full-size lever frame signal board acquired from British Rail. Originally in Crewe South Junction, Howard has re-equipped it for Great Cockrow, working in principle as it did when it controlled the main line out of Euston.
We've got a lot of young lads who come along, and they work through every department, just as they would have done in the olden days on steam railways. They start by cleaning engines and then firing them up, and then they're allowed to drive them round the engine shed, but they don't actually go out until they're competent.
Well, my dad used to take me out now and then. We used to go out to railways, big steam railways, and I just went from there. You know, I got really interested in steam.
So I can go a bit further?
Yeah, you just come here and I do as I'm told and do what I'm told. But I enjoy it. I enjoy all of it.
Well, that's right. Scale is of limited importance to the true steam buff. It's authenticity they buy. These miniature locomotives have real steam power and can comfortably pull a train carrying 30 people.
where most people have red and white corpuscles, we have red and steam, which seems to be the ideal mix as far as we're concerned.
What I'm now doing is getting a reasonable head of water into the gauge glass here before we set off. But putting that water in, of course, kills the fire in the process because you're cooling everything off as you go. So the way around that is we then put the blower back on.
Bank manager Laurie Marshall on the straight and narrow, travelling through a precisely controlled world where the chaos and uncertainty of everyday life is brought to order through personal skill and effort. It's the look of steam trains that appeals to Colin Garrett, not driving them. He's one of the top British steam train photographers, and he's not a purist, but a man who likes to stretch the images he finds and distort them for a heightened reality that goes beyond the endurance of some steam buffs.
From the time I turned professional to document the end of the steam age, I've covered some 50 countries of the world so far. I was not interested in the clinical details of the locomotives. I was interested in their atmosphere, of what they looked like as phenomena in the landscape.
What Garrett brought back from his travels was recorded proof that beyond Britain, the world of steam was far from dead. The strength of images like these created the first real stirrings in the United Kingdom of what is now a mass repatriation industry. Real working locomotives for a Britain that ran out of steam over 30 years ago.
Going back here a few pages, we have an engine built in Manchester in something like 118, 119 years ago and still in active service at one of the Indian sugar mills. And at the end of the trip, we came back to England. There was a letter waiting for me saying, "You'll be pleased to know that we have closed our railway tramway system." I wasn't the least bit pleased. They then went on to say, "If you'd like to buy the engines, please make us an offer." Now, I didn't want these 3 engines, but I knew lots of people who would want them. And of course, they were very quickly snapped up.
The problem in the situation with India was that scrap is worth far more in India than actually the value of the locomotive as we would see it in this country. And I got very heavily involved on this particular project and found it was quite an interesting thing to do. It was a challenge to get people to get involved, to help, and to see just how much people would help.
The first committed preservers of locomotives were the museums. 20, 30 years ago, you didn't have to hunt for steam engines. The country seemed littered with them. But even then, most of the best were lost before their value was recognized. In Crewe and Manchester, in Doncaster, Swindon and Glasgow, local-built engines were rescued from the scrap heap and placed in transport museums as tangible proof of great industries that had been erased in one generation. The motivation was local pride, not steam buffery, and even the curators didn't always share the buff's obsession.
One day I was sitting in my office minding my own business, as curators do, and someone phoned up and said, "Did I want to buy a steam engine?" And that's a kind of phone call one gets every day, and the usual answer to questions like that is, you know, you need help, or can't you see a doctor about this? But it was a genuine offer. There were a company in Plymouth who own a steam engine built in Springburn in 1957, exported to Africa, which had been repatriated by the chairman of this group, and they now wanted to sell it off. And in addition to it being the kind of engine we want, it's also the biggest steam engine in Britain, the last engine ever built in Springburn that survives, and it's the biggest engine ever built in Scotland. I'm a social historian, and I'm interested in the history of communities and industrial communities in particular. So if they made washing machines in Springburn, I would be looking for the ultimate washing machine as a symbol of local achievement. It just happens that they made steam engines, and we're getting it back as a symbol of community pride. It has nothing to do with steam preservation as such.
Locos in museums have limited appeal for steam buffs. They demand fire in the belly, smoke and steam, running on main lines, the engine performing the function it was built for. Even when the engine is steamed up and on the line, the enthusiast's dream is not fulfilled. They have to give it the proper setting so they can enshrine it.
Morning, Jim. Well, it's just after 7 o'clock.
The attraction is really to the whole railway. You see, around me here, there are things like gas lamps and the hanging baskets on the gas lamps, and these beautiful signs that have been carefully collected from the past. Now, this is all really set dressing. This is providing the whole atmosphere through which the steam locomotive and the carriages will pass. So it's a totality, it's a complete experience, which fascinates me and most of my colleagues on this railway.
If there was a name for this kind of behavior, it would be train sexualism. But no matter how much they dress up or how hard they try, it's always the railway children they end up with. And in charge, the ultimate cheerful man-child, playing at work, flagging up the past.
Well, the suit I'm wearing, I actually had constructed for a charity ball at the then Clapham Museum. It was a fancy dress thing, and so I thought, well, I better do it properly and have a Great Western station master suit. So I borrowed one, took it along to my tailor, and then I went along to Bond Street, took the hat along and said, can you copy this? And the man said, oh, yes, no problem. So I had it.
This is the garden in the estate of Sir William McAlpine, Mr. Bill to the buffs, living proof that the difference between men and boys is the price of their toys.
I acquired a building from a place called Bourne End, and so rebuilt it and put it on a platform, and we christened it Bourne Again Junction.
It wasn't all he bought. McAlpine of McAlpine engineering fame matched his interest in heritage with the depth of his pockets and dug deep to buy the Flying Scotsman. The best known ever British steam locomotive. The engine was languishing in America in a welter of debts, brought on by a series of trans-America goodwill trips that couldn't promote the fare home. Mr. Bill repatriated it. Why? Because, like Mount Everest, it was there.
I'm absolutely convinced that you're born with this strange disease. Everybody I've spoken to has said the same thing, who's the people who are really addicted to steam and railways. I'm sure this comes from their earliest memories. Certainly does with me. There were some auctions of a railway museum, and I thought the equipment was attractive, and I bought what pleased me.
A Apart from the model trains in the museum, there are no half-measure, half-size constraints here. This is the original full-size departure board from Brighton Mainline Station. If the cash is available, the drive in train enthusiasm is ever upwards, pursuing the real thing. And anyone who never got over the boyish dream of becoming an engine driver can come to the Bluebell Railway in deepest Sussex and go to school and exercise the yearning.
It's a 5-day course, and they do 2 days in the classroom. They do a couple of days walking around the shed with the classroom work, and then they do 3 days actually working the engine. The last day is the icing on the cake, where they actually run up the line to Horsted Canes and back. They do 6 trips during the day. You've got the ground speed down to half walking pace, and you've got it so perfectly that you roll back onto it and we hardly knew we touched. And then having touched, you didn't let the thing bounce away again. So we've got no problem with easing up. So it was really well done.
No, it felt really comfortable as well.
Good. But that's the first time you've used that brake, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
That's the steam on its own. Yeah. And using that brake, you've got to hold it in against the pressure.
Yeah.
So you're going to do that
Right.
next.
Yes.
Oh,
Right.
it was very good. Anybody that has this interest and can scratch the money together, get the time off work, they do it. But I'm proudest of being an engine driver. That's the best thing I've ever done in my life. The engine driver in the past was a man who got complete satisfaction from his job. The engine driver today is like a laboratory rat in a situation where he can't win. He's strapped to his seat, nobody to talk to, monotonous job, but allied with tremendous responsibility. It's a terrible job. I had a letter from a chap, and the wording of the letter was something like this: I need another fix. Can you put me on another course to do some freight training? And this chap, about at 3 months intervals, says this sort of thing. He needs another fix. So it is an addiction in a way, and I feel slightly responsible for setting people on this downward path.
For a steam buff, this is the biggest fix imaginable. First the engine, the Osprey, built to run non-stop from London to Edinburgh. Same class as the Mallard, an A4 Pacific, which broke the world's steam speed record, 126 miles per hour. And the Osprey is about to cross the ultimate railway bridge in the whole wide world. That monument to Scottish engineering excellence, the Forth Rail Bridge, and in its centenary year. For John Cameron and his footplate crew, the joy is unconfined. Every boat in the Firth below deserves to be waved at. Of course, there is a downside to all this romance. In strict railway terms, the Forth Bridge is expensive to upkeep. For over 30 years, the bridge has hovered under a beaching-style axe, ever since the good doctor worked out that it might be just as easy and cheaper to get north via Perth. For just like those Indian locomotives, the steel that makes up the bridge is worth a fortune, and the upkeep horrendous. It's not the cantilevered structure that holds the bridge up. It's emotion and steam, or at least its memory, flying in the face of market forces. Maybe the buffs do finally know something about the power of emotion that the rest of us don't.
George Stephenson was a prophet. He started the relationship between man and a machine, which is almost godlike. It's a most peculiar relationship.